This is the midterm review for special problems in animation. It will cover the terms and definitions that I have given you in a study guide. First, a binary digit. A bit is a binary digit. It's formed from two words, binary digit. It takes the beginning of the first word and the end of the second word. And it's binary because there's two states. It's like an on or an off switch. It's like electricity. So computer memory is a measured state change, either 0 or 1, on or off. This is the smallest unit of computer memory. When you put it together with other bits, you form a byte. So a group of 8 bits is a byte. It's also called an octet. 8 bits of computer memory is a byte. A pixel is formed from the words picture and element. It takes the beginning of the first word and the beginning of the second word. It refers to the one dot of light on the screen that you're looking at. So when you have pixels per inch, that's how many dots in each inch. A computer screen consists of a grid pattern of dots. It's also called a bitmap or raster image. The unit that we use to measure the speed or the resolution of the videos is frames per second. It's the unit of frame rate. It's designated by the number of frames and p per second. Common frame rates include 29.27p, which is pixels, which is per second, I guess. NTSC drop frame. This was necessary in early video to compensate for the addition of color. They had to drop off part of a frame, so that's why you only have 0.97. The frame rate that we use in this class is 29.97. Usually it's referred to as 30 frames per second because that's easier to talk about. 24p is the standard that was adopted for sound movies in 35mm sound film in the 20s and 30s. 25p is the video format used for compatibility with television frame rates because television has other settings it also needs. And then 30p is a progressive video format. But the most important one, of course, is the 29.97. Linked files and embedded files are important to understand. Linked files is code describing where an image will be located with a pointer, and that's a computer term, a pointer to the physical location on the drive of the image file. So it's saying, look here for this picture. You need to keep the image files in the same folder on your disk, or the file can't be rendered, and that's when you end up with those strange colored lines and bars. Embedded files, some files will be embedded files in some programs, and these are, it's got the entire original code in the destination file, so you don't need that. After Effects doesn't embed, but links files that you import. Some of the files that you create inside of After Effects are embedded, of course, because they were made by After Effects. But when you import your Photoshop or your Illustrator files, they are linked. Now, there are some important animators you should remember that we looked at. We looked at Winsor McCay, we looked at Walt Disney, and we looked at Max and Dave Fleischer. Winsor McCay was that early groundbreaking animator who released Gertie the Dinosaur in 1913 that inspired Disney and Fleischer both to become animators. So they saw this film and they were amazed that this character had such personality, and they said, I want to do that. Walt Disney, he was an early animator who became the most famous of his generation. He introduced Mickey Mouse, he introduced sound animation, he introduced Technicolor cartoons, and the Silly Symphonies. And that's, of course, which led into a lot more other studios using music along with image to try to create the same kind of effect. It was very popular. Max and Dave Fleischer, of course, are the animators of Betty Boop. They also did Superman and Popeye. In 1917, they invented rotoscoping, the method of tracing filmed or videotaped movements to create natural motion and animation. You remember that we used that greyhound running for the rotoscoped animation when we were doing the first project, and that was by Edward Muybridge, who did a lot of motion studies where he took pictures of different people and animals moving, and they were actually still images, but because he took them with trip lines, they were very quickly done and showed the motion in sequence, so they call them sequential images. The production terms, remember, you need to remember production terms and use them correctly so you can communicate with other people working on the same kind of projects as you are. So a frame is a single image that is part of a scene, like a word in writing. A keyframe is a frame that shows an important change in position or appearance, which is used as a guide for subsequent action, used in storyboards to tell your story. A storyboard is a visual outline of an animation or movie, like your note cards when you're writing a speech, or something that you're using as an outline that will give you the important points you want to cover, and then you can fill in the details. So it uses keyframes to describe the action. So the keyframe is like your note card. It contains notes about dialogue, camera moves, and editing. A scene is action unbroken by any change to another visual. So the background's not going to be, a different, you're not standing on a cliff and suddenly you're underneath the ocean, unless you jump off, I guess. But that would be part of a sequence, which is a series of scenes expressing a single theme. And you can think of this, remember when we did onomatopoeia, we had all these different comps, and those were our scenes. And then we put them together in our output comp, which was our sequence. Production terms: continuity, storyline, or plot. Matching of elements contained in separate scenes to make sure there's no change of relative size or important detail. So as you see here, we have Bob Dylan with gray hair, and then we have Bob Dylan with red hair. Well, he wouldn't change his hair color. If you were talking, to Bob Dylan and you looked away, you wouldn't look back and see he had different colored hair. So that is a problem in continuity. Production terms. In-betweens are those frames which fill in the gradual changes between keyframes to create the illusion of a smooth movement. So you make your keyframes, you've got your rabbit crouching, your rabbit leaping, your rabbit about to land, your rabbit crouching again, and then you go back and you say, what kind of in-betweens will there be? Well, then you put in the in-betweens and you see there's just this complete smooth motion across the bottom there. Vector graphics. Mathematical formulas are used to describe the shapes in the file. Your fonts are scaled without losing definition and appear the same at any resolution. This is why we want to use vector fonts, and this is why we want to use, when we take our image in from Photoshop to After Effects, we want to change it into editable text. Otherwise, it's just a raster image and it will get fuzzy like the one on the right. Raster graphics. The image is composed of individual pixels on the two-dimensional grid. Your raster map is a grid that is filled with pixel dots to create the picture. So in a raster image, when the object is magnified, the dots will become larger and more apparent. The resolution or number of pixels per inch determines the clarity of detail in the image. So you see, if you make it bigger and bigger and bigger, it doesn't look good because it doesn't have the detail you need. Aspect ratio is the proportion of the width to the height. So the width of 4 by 3 or 16 by 9, or here we've got the width of 3 by 2, or the width of 4 by 2. And this will tell you what your aspect ratio is. In image processing, Image editing is performed by mathematically operating on the values of the pixels. So anything that you do with a computer program to change a picture is called image processing. Design theories. The rule of thirds. Remember I told you about the rule of thirds, showed you how to set up your Photoshop so that you can make it always use the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a general theory that divides an image plane into 9 equal zones by placing 2 equally spaced vertical lines and 2 equally spaced horizontal lines. Then, the artist will organize the objects in space by arranging the image using these guides, either to locate things along the lines or intersections or somehow relate objects to the grid structure. And photography, film, painting, and other fields use this theory. So you can see that there's a general shape of the houses, the way the trees are growing, and the shadows, and of course the horizon in the background, that all work together in these zones. They're broken up into sort of this 3-part thirds organizational structure. Other design theory, Gestalt principles. Remember, the Gestalt principles are laid out, and we've got these principles that I've got here. There's 7 of them. Figure ground, so you've got a positive image, which is the figure, and then ground is the negative space or white space. So you can have images that will flip, like here you've got 2 people silhouetted against a window, or when you change the colors, you can see it as a vase. So the shapes are just basically there, and it's the figure-ground relationship. And you can use this to your advantage. You can have figure ground that sort of goes back and forth when the person's looking at it. Equilibrium. Every psychological field tends toward order, balance, and maximum efficiency. So if something is not balanced, then your brain tries to make it balanced as you're looking at it, and that will affect the type of energy that you've got in your image. Isomorphic correspondence. People are reminded of their physical or psychological experiences by images that trigger the memory. And this will color the way you feel about an image. So you've got stop signs and caution signs and yield signs, and you've got your red, yellow, green for stop and go. You've got pictures of things that you may feel positively for, like flowers or cats. And then there's, of course, the snowflake. And these are all sort of icons for things that create an attitude of an actual sense of feeling that you get from an image. Closure. We have a natural tendency to close the gaps and complete an unfinished form visually, such as pliers or a gate in a fence, the opening in the letter C, etc. So here we've got these edges that, although they're not complete, you can tell it is the same person's profile. Proximity. Closer shapes form groups by visually uniting, so they look like they belong together. Or continuation, where a straight line or a curve like an arrow will start your eyes following, and you will keep looking along that direction until something else stops you. And you can use this to set up the space and make people look around the space in certain angles and directions. So it helps to organize your space so you can tell the story the way you want it told. Similarity. Identical objects will be seen together in groups, and similar objects are defined by the shape, so they're all about the same shape, about the same size, but they're different color. So you can tell that the red ones are in a different team than the black ones. Sports uniforms use similarity so we can tell the teams apart. Color theory is another thing you can use to organize your space and give people a sense of feeling about what's supposed to be happening, how they're supposed to feel about something, and what is supposed to be happening in the space. So warm colors like magenta, red, yellow, orange come forward visually, and they will dominate the space, especially if they're very saturated. Cool colors like green, blue, and violet tend to recede. Colors can be warmed or cooled by mixing with some of the other hues. So you can make a violet more warm by adding more red to it or more magenta. Saturated colors will come forward, and desaturated colors, like colors that have gray added to them, they will recede and go back. Comparison and contrast determines the effect. So if something is very dark against something that is very light, that will really determine where the space is. The very dark will fall back, the very light will come forward. Dominant versus subordinate. You can use the placement, size, and relationships between the objects to tell your audience what's important, how it is related to the space and to other objects, and what your animation means. Larger objects will be seen as more important. Objects in the foreground have more importance than objects in the background. The dominance can be determined by size, shape, color, value, depth, texture, density, saturation, orientation. So if you look at this image, which is El Lissitzky's Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge from 1919, around the time of the Russian Revolution, you can see that the red wedge is very important. It's very big, it's very strongly saturated, and it's a very hot color. And it is at an angle, and it fills the entire mid space, and it's at an oppositional angle than a lot of the other angles. So it really draws your eye into it, and you see some other red shapes that are related to it. They're all going in the same kind of direction. So that does determine what the dominant object is. Color systems. We are using the additive color system, or red, green, and blue, RGB. And if you set it up in a color circle, you'll see that when they're added together in the additive color system, they turn white, because everything added together equals white, because there's more colors coming into it. The secondary colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow, which are the subtractive print colors, right? The CMYK colors are the opposite of red, green, blue. But when you do the subtractive color system circles, you'll see that although added together they make black, and the secondary colors are red, green, and blue, they are slightly different than the red, green, and blue you get with the additive color system, because when you add together colors in the subtractive color system, they lose saturation, they become less strong, and therefore you have a much smaller color gamut or range of colors available when you're using the subtractive color system. Remember the 12 principles of animation, which I have gone ahead and summarized very quickly in these on this page. Stretch and squash. Stretches in direction of move, squashes on impact. Anticipation leans back and then bursts forward. Staging, arranging the stage to show the importance of different objects. Straight ahead, action and pose to pose. Drawing each image one at a time straight ahead, or drawing the poses and filling in the action. Follow through and overlapping action. The motion causes the motion of other connected objects. Slow in and slow out will begin slowly, then speed up, then at speed slow down to a stop. Arcs, motion in curved paths, looks more natural. Secondary action, objects connected moving independently of each other. Timing, realistic spacing of actions. Exaggeration, emphasizing and enlarging details beyond reality for an effect. Solid drawing, being a good artist. And appeal, genuine emotional contact with the drawn image. So, that's the summary. Detail, squash and stretch. This makes a shape change to follow the direction that it is moving, flattening as it lands. The volume stays the same. If it stretches longer, it becomes skinnier. If it becomes flatter, it also becomes fatter. This makes an object appear to be moving naturally. Anticipation. When the character is about to make a move, he pulls back to collect energy, like a cat crouching before leaping. And here's a string running. And you can see those are the keyframes at the top in the production sketch. Staging. Composing the stage to draw the attention of the viewer to the important details using placement, lighting, color, and Gestalt principles of composition to arrange space. This is a stage set that I designed for a junior high production about 30 years ago. Bad picture, but you get the idea. 12 principles of animation, and this, of course, these are the different things we did in the tutorials for Project 1. Additive, when you draw, duplicate the frame, add to the image, duplicate the frame over and over. Subtractive, when you draw, copy the frame and erase some, copy, and then continue to erase and copy the frame until the image is gone. Or manual transform, draw, duplicate, stretch, or skew, or rotate. Then, of course, pose to pose, the time of a move is calculated. When does it start? How long does it last? Where does it end? And the number of frames needed is determined. The beginning of the move is drawn. The ending pose is drawn, and position in the middle is drawn, and then use the onion skinning, semi-transparent overlays, to finish the sequence, the in-betweening. And so there's an example of in-betweening that running, jumping rabbit. Follow through and overlapping action. So the motion of the character or object is shown as layers of fluid motion occurring at the same time, but with slightly different timing and placement. Like swinging your arms while the legs are walking, not the exact same motion, but during the same sequence. When the main image stops moving, the parts may continue and then return, like the hair on the head of a character as he stops running. Or as you see here, there's this sort of a floral lay around the neck of the most beautiful horse in the world, and then of course the trailing tail and Bugs Bunny's braids, and they're all bouncing. This motion is related because the bounce itself causes the motion, but it's after the first motion, so it's related and yet it's not the same motion. It's connected, but it's slightly different. Ease in, ease out, slow in, slow out. In After Effects, you ease into the station, so you're coming along and then you slow down and then come to a stop. You ease out from the station, you're stopped. You begin to speed up as you move, so you start moving and then you get faster and faster. So ease in, ease out. Arcs. Animals and people usually move in curved paths. Straight line motion looks mechanical and unrealistic. So the man, as he's walking, you see his head, at the top of his head, there's like a line that becomes a curve as he walks, and it curves up and down and up and down and up and down. Secondary action, your eyes blink, your arms swing, your feet tap. Living creatures move their bodies in different directions all at once, so use simultaneous actions to make it look more realistic. So his eyes are closing at one point in this sequence here, and his hair bounces up and down. But it's all secondary, and the secondary action is very similar to the follow through and overlapping action, and it's kind of a fine line between the two. Timing. The real world has realistic timing. Things only happen at a certain speed. To make the animations more realistic, use your timeline to organize the motions and make it seem believable. So lots of things happen slower than you think they do, and lots of things happen faster than you think they do. And if you watch a lot of live action film, you can kind of get an idea how fast things happen. If you just, as you're watching something happen, count 1 1,000, 2 1,000 in your mind. You can get an idea of how many frames you're going to need for a particular action. Exaggeration. Used skillfully and in careful doses, exaggeration can add humor, liveliness, and improve the impact of your message, as well as draw the attention of the viewer. So as you see, the old man in the mountain, his eyes, his head, his ears, his feet, everything about him is exaggerated, and that is for the effect. They want him to look like he's nutty. And then, of course, Betty Boop's head is huge. So, exaggeration used skillfully. Solid drawing. And here's an Albrecht Dürer Good understanding of visual principles like how we understand two-dimensional and three-dimensional space and how to show mass, weight, and materials in a convincing way. In other words, being a good artist, being able to express things in ways that look reasonable and truthful. An appeal, giving the character or image character, personality, the appearance of emotional depth. Kittens have appeal, but so do alligators. So creating an emotional reaction to a perceived personality, positive or negative. Some more of the terms for film and movies. Remember the persistence of vision. When the eye sees images in sequence changing quickly, and the images persist on the retina until replaced by the next image, they are interpreted by the brain as a smooth motion. And this concept is the basis for movies, video, animation, etc. And here's an early animation tool, which was called a phenakistoscope or a phantoscope. And basically, you would hold this in front of a mirror and spin it by the point in the middle. You'd have it on a stick, and you'd look through slots. And those slots would make your eye break it up so you could see these different positions as very continuous motion. So, film and movies shots, composing the frame, establishing shots like the extreme long shot or the long shot, where you see a lot of stuff. And you're not looking at the details, you're looking at the overall space. Medium shot, a single shot, a two shot, when you can see people from the waist up, and or even standing together, a full shot, but they're close enough that you can see who they are and get an idea of what they're talking about, so usually used in dialogue. And then close-up shots, head and shoulders, single shot, details when you want to see the person talking directly to you or look at something close up to get an idea what the details are. And then scene transitions, a fade or cross-fade, the gradual appearance or disappearance of a scene to black. Fades will separate major sequences of action, suggestive lapse of time or change of location. The length of the fade determines the dramatic effect. Now, the Venetian blinds, that is a type of a wipe. Venetian blinds is a type of wipe. In a wipe, the current scene is displaced by the following scene with a distinct edge between. In this case, the shape of the blinds is a set of parallel bars which grow or shrink to reveal the next scene. And then a wipe, a horizontal, vertical, or diagonal wipe displaces one scene with another with a distinct edge between. In this case, the first scene moves from the right to reveal the next scene, and the edge is feathered to create a smooth transition. The iris wipe, or circle wipe. The iris or circle wipe displaces the following scene with a round or oval shape and grows or shrinks to reveal the next scene. Some of the file formats and extensions that we have used this semester. So PSD, that's the Photoshop, it's raster with vector capabilities. And when we import a Photoshop file into After Effects, you convert it to editable text. So if you've got text layers and can convert them to editable text, that gives you a lot more possibilities. AI is the Adobe Illustrator type, vector-based images and graphics. You can convert vector art into After Effects shape layers, and that gives you a lot more capabilities. Also, you can continuously rasterize the AI layer for a sharper resolution. The AEP is the After Effects project file. After Effects is a visual effects compositing application used for motion graphics and film production. And then, of course, the output that we do is the MP4. MPEG-4 Part 14, a digital media format based on QuickTime for compressed video files. MP3 is an audio, and it's a compressed audio coding format. AIFF is an audio interchange file format, and this is an Apple audio file format. And then WAV, waveform audio file format, is a Windows and IBM audio file format. Some import options. When you're importing into After Effects, you choose if you want it to be footage, imported without layers, Audio files are considered footage. Composition, you can import it as a composition, and then all layers are available to be edited separately. And if you use composition retained layer sizes, the PSD or AI files are imported with retained layer sizes. The anchor points are placed relative to the center of the object on each layer instead of relative to the entire file boundaries. And remember, we've got keyboard shortcuts. You've got useful shortcuts that we've used in class. If you have a layer selected in the timeline, you will reveal all the keyframes that have been created for the current layer. If no layer is selected, it reveals all the keyframes for the current comp. AA, this is the material options for a 3D layer, so we're not doing that yet. LL reveals the audio waveform for a sound layer. V will get the selection tool when you have another tool selected, but don't use keyboard shortcuts when you're using the type tool because you will type a letter. So just don't. Now when you press P, T, R, and S, this reveals the P position, T opacity, R rotation, and S scale transforms for whatever current layer you have. W will select your rotation tool. Y selects the anchor point or pan behind tool. If you use the bracket for the left bracket, it moves in the endpoint of the selected layer to the current CTI position. If you use the right bracket, it moves the out point of the selected layer to the current CTI position. So that way you can actually move the beginning or end of your layer. Universal keyboard shortcuts that you should remember for every program: Command Z, undo. Command A, select all. Command S, saves your file.